Carlos Mendez checked his phone as another ride request pinged through the Uber app. 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday night, technically Thursday morning. The pickup location was a 24-hour gas station on the edge of Miami's industrial district, about 15 minutes from his current position. Carlos had been driving for Uber for 4 years, ever since he'd been laid off from his construction job. It paid the bills, gave him flexible hours, and he genuinely enjoyed meeting people from all walks of life. In 4 years, he'd completed over 12,000 rides, given hundreds of tourists advice about Miami, helped drunk college kids get home safely, and driven everyone from business executives to elderly people to doctor's appointments. He'd seen a lot in those 12,000 rides, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to encounter. Carlos accepted the ride request and headed toward the gas station. The area was sketchy, mostly industrial warehouses, a few rundown businesses, not much foot traffic, especially at this hour. He wondered what someone would be doing at this gas station in the middle of the night. When he arrived, he immediately spotted his passenger. A young woman, maybe late teens or early 20s, stood near the gas pumps under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was pacing nervously, looking around constantly as if expecting someone to appear. What struck Carlos immediately was her appearance. She was wearing a men's shirt that was at least 3 sizes too big, hanging off her shoulders. The sweatpants she wore were equally oversized, bunched at the waist and dragging on the ground. Most alarming, she had no shoes. Her feet were bare and dirty, with what looked like cuts and bruises. Carlos pulled up to the curb. The woman saw the Uber sticker on his windshield and practically ran to the car, yanking the back door open and throwing herself inside. "Please drive," she said urgently in accented English. "Please just go, now." Carlos's instincts immediately went on high alert. Something was very wrong. "Are you Elena? The app says I'm picking up Elena Rodriguez?" Yes, I'm Elena. Please, we need to leave. Now, please." Her voice was shaking. Carlos looked in the rearview mirror and saw her face clearly for the first time. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, with long dark hair that was tangled and dirty. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She had bruises on her arms and what looked like a healing cut on her forehead. But it was her eyes that struck Carlos most. They showed absolute terror mixed with desperate, fragile hope, the look of someone who'd been through hell and saw the slightest possibility of escape. "Where are we going?" Carlos asked, though he was already pulling away from the gas station. "The destination in the app. The police station. Please hurry." Carlos checked the app. The destination was indeed Coral Gables Police Station, about 25 minutes away. A woman in obvious distress, wearing clothes that clearly weren't hers, with no shoes, requesting a ride to a police station at 2:47 a.m. Every alarm bell in Carlos's mind was ringing. "Are you okay?" Carlos asked gently. "Are you in danger right now?" Elena was scanning the road behind them through the rear window. "Please just drive, fast as you can. Don't stop for anything. They might be following." "Who might be following?" "The men. The men who—" "Please, I don't want to talk. Just drive, please." Carlos accelerated, his mind racing. This woman had clearly escaped from something. Kidnapping, assault, abuse, and whoever had her was apparently dangerous enough that she was terrified of being followed. He made a quick decision. "Elena, I'm Carlos. I'm going to get you to the police station safely. But I think I should call 911 right now so police know we're coming and what's happening. Is that okay?" Elena nodded frantically. Yes, call them. Tell them I escaped from the warehouse. Tell them there are other girls still there. Many girls. They need to help them." Carlos felt his blood run cold. Other girls. A warehouse. This wasn't just assault or domestic violence. This sounded like something much bigger and more organized. He immediately called 911 using his car's hands-free system. "This is Carlos Mendez. I'm an Uber driver currently heading east on SW 8th Street toward Coral Gables. I have a passenger who appears to have escaped from a dangerous situation. She's requesting to go to the police station. She's injured, barefoot, clearly distressed, and says there are other girls being held at a warehouse. I think this might be human trafficking or kidnapping." The 911 dispatcher's voice sharpened immediately. "Stay on the line. What's your current location?" Carlos gave his location and continued updating as he drove. The dispatcher confirmed police were being dispatched to intercept them and escort them safely to the station. "Sir, is the passenger in immediate danger? Do you see anyone following you?" Carlos checked his mirrors. "I don't see anyone following us right now. But the passenger is extremely frightened and says men might be pursuing her." Elena was still scanning the road behind them, her whole body trembling. Carlos could see she was on the verge of breaking down completely. Adrenaline was likely the only thing keeping her together. "Elena," Carlos said gently, "police are on their way to meet us. You're safe. No one can hurt you now." You don't know them, Elena whispered. They're everywhere. They have connections. They'll find me. Who are they? Elena didn't answer, just continued watching the road behind them, her hands gripping the seat so tightly her knuckles were white. Within 5 minutes, 2 police cars with lights flashing pulled up behind Carlos's vehicle, forming an escort. The 911 dispatcher instructed Carlos to continue to the police station with the police escort. No one could get to Elena now. She was under police protection. Elena saw the police cars and burst into tears, relief mixed with ongoing terror. They're really going to help? They're going to get the other girls? There are so many. Some are so young. Please, they have to save them. The police will help everyone, Carlos assured her. Just hold on. We're almost there. They arrived at Coral Gables police station 7 minutes later, escorted by police cars. Officers immediately surrounded Carlos's vehicle. A female officer opened the back door carefully. Elena, I'm Officer Maria Santos. You're safe now. Can you come inside with me? Elena stumbled out of the car, still barefoot, still wearing the oversized clothes. She looked tiny and broken, a young woman who'd endured unimaginable trauma. Officer Santos wrapped a blanket around Elena's shoulders and guided her toward the station entrance. As they walked, Elena turned back to look at Carlos, her eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she said. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for helping. You're going to be okay, Carlos told her. You're safe now. But as Elena disappeared into the police station, Carlos knew this was just the beginning. Whatever Elena had escaped from was big. She'd mentioned other girls, a warehouse, men with connections. This was organized crime. And somehow, a routine Uber ride at 2:47 a.m. had put Carlos right in the middle of it. Inside the police station, Elena Rodriguez sat in an interview room with Officer Santos and Detective Lisa Park from the department's human trafficking unit. She was given water, food, medical attention for her injuries, and time to compose herself before they began asking questions. Elena, you're safe here, Detective Park said gently. No one can hurt you, but we need you to tell us everything that happened so we can help the other girls you mentioned and arrest the people who did this to you. Elena took a shaky breath and began telling her story. What emerged was a harrowing tale of deception, kidnapping, and systematic exploitation. Elena was originally from Honduras. 3 months ago, at age 19, she'd been approached by a woman in her hometown who said she could help Elena get to the United States for a good job. The woman, who called herself Maria, said she worked for a company that placed young women in housekeeping and childcare positions with wealthy American families. Maria said I could make $2,000 a month, Elena explained. That's more money than my whole family makes in a year in Honduras. She said the family would provide housing and food. She said it was legal, that they would help me get work papers. It sounded like an amazing opportunity. Elena's family was desperately poor. Her father had died 2 years ago, leaving her mother alone with 5 children. Elena, as the oldest, felt responsible for helping support her siblings. The job offer seemed like a miracle, a way to send money home and give her family a better life. Maria arranged everything, Elena continued. She said the company would pay for my travel to the US. I just had to sign some papers agreeing to work for them for 2 years to pay back the travel costs. It seemed reasonable. But the papers Elena signed were actually debt bondage contracts written in English, which Elena couldn't read. She'd signed away her freedom without realizing it. Maria arranged Elena's travel from Honduras through Guatemala and Mexico, with Elena traveling in a group of 8 other young women who'd been recruited similarly. They were told they'd cross into the US legally with work papers Maria's company had arranged. But the crossing wasn't legal. They were smuggled across the border near El Paso, Texas, hidden in a truck compartment. Once in the US, everything changed. The men who picked us up in El Paso were different from Maria, Elena said, her voice shaking. They were mean, scary. They took our phones and identification. They said we owed $15,000 each for being brought to America. They said we'd work until the debt was paid off. The 9 women were driven to Miami and taken to a warehouse in the industrial district, the same area where Elena had later escaped to the gas station. The warehouse appeared abandoned from outside, but inside was a horrific operation. Dozens of women held captive, forced into prostitution and labor exploitation to pay off fabricated debts. There were maybe 30 or 40 women there when I arrived, Elena said. From Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, Venezuela. All of us had been promised jobs. All of us were trapped. The women were held in locked rooms with barred windows. They were given minimal food and water. They were threatened constantly, told that if they tried to escape, their families back home would be killed. The traffickers had detailed information about the women's families, making the threats terrifyingly credible. They showed us photos of our families, Elena explained, crying. They knew where my mother and sisters lived. They said if I didn't cooperate or if I tried to escape, they'd hurt my family. I believed them. The women were forced into prostitution, brought to various locations around Miami to meet clients. They were given revealing clothes to wear during these encounters, then returned to the warehouse afterward. The money they earned went entirely to the traffickers. The women received nothing. They said every dollar we earned went toward our debt, Elena said. But the debt never went down. They kept adding charges for food, for housing, for the clothes they made us wear, for protection. No matter how much money we made them, we always owed more. This is a classic trafficking tactic, debt bondage combined with threats of violence to create a system where victims feel escape is impossible. Elena had been in the warehouse for 3 months, believing escape was impossible, but 2 nights ago, something had changed. A new woman had arrived, kidnapped from Miami, rather than brought from another country. The woman, Jessica, had been taken from a nightclub parking lot and was being held for ransom. Jessica was different from us, Elena explained. She was American, from Miami. She had family here who would look for her. The men were nervous about her. They kept her separate from us. But I heard her talking to one of the other girls. She said her family had money and would pay ransom, but she was also telling the girl to find a way to tell police where we all were. Jessica's presence had created chaos in the operation. The traffickers were arguing about what to do with her, distracted by the ransom negotiation and worried about increased law enforcement attention. Last night, one of the guards had gotten drunk and fallen asleep at his post. Elena had seen an opportunity. A small window in a storage room wasn't properly barred. Elena had managed to squeeze through it and escape into the night. I ran and I didn't stop, Elena said. I was wearing the nightgown they made me wear for the clients, but someone had left work clothes in the storage room, a man's shirt and pants. I grabbed them and put them on. Then I climbed out the window. Elena had run for miles through the industrial area, barefoot, terrified the traffickers would find her. She'd found the 24-hour gas station and used their phone to call for an Uber, requesting the police station as her destination. I remembered the address of the police station because I saw it on a billboard once, Elena explained. I thought if I could just get there, I'd be safe, but I was so scared the men would catch me before I made it. When the Uber driver arrived and he looked kind, I thought maybe God was helping me, and when he believed me and called 911, I knew I'd finally be safe. Detective Park documented every detail of Elena's account, the warehouse location, the names Elena knew for the traffickers, descriptions of the facility, information about the other women being held, details about how the operation worked. Elena, you've been incredibly brave, Park said. The information you're giving us is going to help us shut down this entire operation and rescue all the other women. We're going to need you to work with us as we plan the raid, but you're safe now. These people can't hurt you anymore. Detective Lisa Park had worked human trafficking cases for 8 years and recognized immediately that Elena's account described a sophisticated, organized trafficking operation. This wasn't some small-time criminal. This was a professional network with resources, connections, and multiple victims. Park called FBI Special Agent David Chen from the Miami Field Office's Human Trafficking Task Force. Cases like this required federal resources and coordination across agencies. We have a trafficking survivor who escaped from a warehouse where potentially 40 victims are being held, Park briefed Chen. She describes a network that brings women from Central America under false pretenses, smuggles them into the U.S., then exploits them through debt bondage, threats against their families, and forced prostitution. She also mentions a recent kidnapping victim, American woman taken from Miami for ransom, being held at the same location. Chen immediately mobilized the task force. This case checked multiple boxes: international trafficking, kidnapping for ransom, organized crime, multiple victims including potentially minors. Elena had mentioned some of the women looked very young. We need to move fast, Chen told the assembled team of FBI agents, local police, and immigration officials. If the traffickers realize one of their victims escaped, they might move the other women or destroy evidence. We need to raid that warehouse within hours, but they had to be strategic. A warehouse holding 40 women with multiple armed guards required careful planning. They couldn't just storm in. The risk to the victims was too high. Elena worked with investigators to provide detailed information about the warehouse, layout of the building, number and location of guards, usually 4 or 5 armed men at any given time, where the women were held, primarily in 2 large rooms on the 2nd floor. The traffickers' names and descriptions. Elena knew them as Victor, Sergey, Carlos, and Dmitry, likely not their real names. Daily routines. Guards changed shifts at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Women were brought food twice daily. Clients came to the warehouse evening and overnight. This operation is run like a business, Agent Chen observed. Professional security, shift schedules, systematic exploitation. This is organized crime, likely connected to a larger trafficking network. Investigators ran the names Elena provided through databases. Victor matched a known trafficker named Viktor Volkov, who had warrants in 3 states for trafficking, kidnapping, and assault. He'd been operating for over a decade, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement by moving frequently and using intermediaries. If Volkov is running this operation, we need to move carefully, Chen said. He's dangerous and has a history of violence. He won't hesitate to harm the victims if he feels cornered. The team planned a coordinated raid for that evening, before the 8 p.m. shift change, when they knew guard coverage would be lighter during the transition. They'd have FBI hostage rescue team members, local SWAT, EMTs standing by for victims, victim advocates to help with trauma-informed approach, and immigration officials to help with the non-citizen victims. Meanwhile, Carlos Mendez was asked to come to the police station to give a detailed statement about picking Elena up and what he'd observed. Mr. Mendez, you potentially saved this young woman's life and helped us identify a major trafficking operation, Detective Park told him.
Your decision to take her seriously and call 911 immediately was exactly right. Carlos was still processing everything. She looked so scared. And the clothes she was wearing clearly weren't hers. She had no shoes. She kept looking over her shoulder like someone was chasing her. Everything about the situation screamed that something was wrong. I couldn't just drop her off and pretend I hadn't noticed. Many drivers might have done exactly that, Park said. They might have been uncomfortable but not wanted to get involved. You chose to trust your instincts and help a stranger. That choice is going to save a lot of lives. Carlos went home that morning unable to sleep, thinking about Elena and the other women still being held at that warehouse. He hoped the police raid would be successful and everyone would be rescued safely. At 7:47 p.m. that evening, FBI and local law enforcement descended on the warehouse in coordinated precision. Agents surrounded the building, cutting off escape routes. Snipers took positions on nearby buildings. Hostage rescue teams prepared to breach multiple entry points simultaneously. "This is FBI," came the announcement through loudspeakers. "The building is surrounded. Release all hostages immediately, and exit the building with your hands visible." Inside the warehouse, chaos erupted. Viktor Volkov and his crew realized instantly that their operation had been discovered. Guards scrambled for weapons. Women screamed. Traffickers looked for escape routes. But the FBI had planned for this. The moment the first shots were fired from inside the warehouse, hostage rescue teams breached the building from multiple points, using flashbang grenades and tactical precision to overwhelm the traffickers before they could harm the victims. The raid lasted 12 minutes. In that time, ROAR traffickers, including Viktor Volkov, were arrested by one guard who tried to fight was injured and apprehended. 2 traffickers attempted to flee through a back exit and were captured by the perimeter team. Most importantly, 38 women were found inside the warehouse and rescued. The scene inside the warehouse was horrific. Women were found locked in 2 large rooms with minimal bedding, 1 bathroom, barred windows. The conditions were squalid. Many women showed signs of malnutrition, injury, and trauma. Among the rescued was Jessica Williams, the Miami woman who'd been kidnapped from a nightclub parking lot 8 days earlier. Her family had been frantically searching, had filed missing person reports, and had received a ransom demand. Finding her alive was a relief beyond measure. "We found them," Agent Chen radioed to Detective Park, who was monitoring from command center. 38 women, various ages, various countries of origin, multiple minors. "We've got girls who look like they might be 14, 15 years old. Medical teams are assessing everyone now. No one appears critically injured, though all show signs of trauma and abuse." The rescued women were confused, scared, unsure if this was real or another trick by their captors. Victim advocates moved carefully among them, explaining in Spanish and English that they were being rescued, that the police were there to help, that they were safe. Elena's information had been accurate. She'd described the layout, the number of victims, the guards' routines. Everything checked out. Her bravery in escaping and reporting had led directly to this rescue. The women were taken to a secured facility where they'd receive medical care, forensic exams for prosecution of their traffickers, trauma counseling, and connections to victim services. Those from other countries would work with immigration authorities. Many would be eligible for T visas, a special immigration status for trafficking survivors who cooperate with law enforcement. "This is one of the largest trafficking busts we've had in Florida," Agent Chen told the media at a press conference the next morning. 38 women rescued from horrific conditions, multiple traffickers arrested, including a known kingpin we've been seeking for years. "This investigation is ongoing. We believe this operation was part of a larger network, and will be pursuing all leads." Chen publicly thanked Elena Rodriguez for her courage in escaping and reporting, and Carlos Mendez for recognizing a passenger in distress and calling 911 immediately. Without Mr. Mendez's vigilance and willingness to get involved, Elena might have been recaptured. Without Elena's bravery and detailed information, we couldn't have conducted this raid safely. They're both heroes in this rescue operation. The immediate rescue was just the beginning of a long process for the 38 survivors. Each woman had endured severe trauma and faced complex paths forward. Medical issues. All 38 women received comprehensive medical examinations. Most were malnourished and dehydrated. Many had untreated injuries, bruises, cuts, some with broken bones that had healed improperly. Several had sexually transmitted infections from being forced into prostitution. Some were pregnant. All showed signs of chronic stress and trauma, psychological trauma. Every survivor had PTSD from the trafficking experience. They'd been kidnapped, threatened, abused, exploited, and held against their will for weeks or months. Many were also dealing with trauma from their lives before trafficking, poverty, violence, instability that had made them vulnerable to traffickers' false promises. "These women will need long-term specialized trauma therapy," said Dr. Maria Santos, a psychologist specializing in trafficking survivors. "They've experienced complex trauma, not just one incident but sustained abuse over time. Recovery is possible, but it takes comprehensive support." Legal status. 28 of the 38 women were from other countries and were in the U.S. without legal status. Normally this would result in deportation, but trafficking survivors can receive T visas, allowing them to remain in the U.S. if they cooperate with prosecution of their traffickers. T visas give survivors the chance to rebuild their lives here, explained immigration attorney Jennifer Park. They can live legally in the U.S., work, eventually apply for permanent residence. It recognizes that these women aren't criminals, they're victims who deserve protection and opportunity. 10 of the survivors were American citizens who'd been trafficked within the U.S. Most had been runaways or homeless youth who'd been targeted by traffickers. Their legal situation was simpler, but they still needed housing, services and support. Safety concerns. Even with the Miami traffickers arrested, survivors faced ongoing safety threats. Viktor Volkov's network extended beyond Miami. Other members might retaliate against survivors who testified. Witness protection and safety planning are critical, said victim advocate Lisa Martinez. Survivors need to know how to stay safe, what to do if they're contacted or threatened, and how to access protection if needed. Practical needs. Beyond trauma and legal status, survivors had basic practical needs: housing, clothing, food, education, job training, medical care. Many had nothing. The clothes on their backs belonged to their captors. None had money. Most had no support system in the U.S. Rebuilding a life from nothing is overwhelming, explained Social Services Coordinator Robert Chen. We connect survivors with transitional housing, help them access benefits they're entitled to, provide job training, help with education. The goal is to move from crisis survival to long-term stability. Elena Rodriguez became a central figure in the case. She'd been the one to escape and report, providing information that led to the rescue. She worked closely with prosecutors, giving detailed testimony about the trafficking operation. Elena is an incredibly strong young woman, said prosecutor Jennifer Martinez. After everything she endured, she's been willing to relive it through testimony to help ensure her traffickers are convicted and other survivors get justice. But Elena also struggled. She had nightmares. She was terrified of retaliation. She worried constantly about her family in Honduras. Were they safe? Had the traffickers carried out their threats to harm them? I did what I had to do, Elena told her therapist. I escaped, and I told police what happened. But I'm scared all the time. I'm scared Victor's people will find me. I'm scared they'll hurt my family. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. Jessica Williams, the Miami woman who'd been kidnapped for ransom, was reunited with her family in an emotional scene. She'd been held for 8 days, sexually assaulted, and traumatized. But she was alive. I thought I was going to die, Jessica told her parents, crying. Every day I thought they'd kill me. Finding out there were other women there, women who'd been held for months, made me realize how lucky I was. 8 days felt like forever, but some of those women had been there for a year or more. Jessica's family thanked law enforcement, Elena, and Carlos for the rescue. Elena's courage saved my daughter's life, Jessica's mother said. If she hadn't escaped and reported, we might never have found Jessica.
Carlos Mendez found himself suddenly thrust into the spotlight as the hero Uber driver who'd rescued a trafficking victim. News outlets wanted interviews. Uber featured him in their safety campaigns. Advocacy organizations invited him to speak at events. But Carlos was uncomfortable with the hero label. I just drove someone to the police station, he told journalists. Elena's the hero. She escaped an impossible situation and had the courage to report what happened. I just made a phone call. Still, anti-trafficking advocates explained that Carlos's actions represented exactly the kind of community awareness needed to combat trafficking. Trafficking victims are often in plain sight, explained trafficking expert Dr. Patricia Chen. They're at hotels, restaurants, truck stops, gas stations, being transported by rideshare drivers. But they're too controlled or afraid to ask for help directly. We need everyday people like Carlos who notice concerning signs and are willing to act on them. Rideshare companies began implementing trafficking awareness training for drivers, teaching them indicators that a passenger might be in danger. Passenger appears fearful or submissive. Passenger is with someone who speaks for them and won't let them answer questions. Passenger has no ID, luggage, or personal belongings. Passenger appears malnourished, injured, or exhausted. Passenger makes comments suggesting they're being controlled or exploited. Passenger asks for help or shows signs of distress. Carlos recognized multiple red flags with Elena, said the training materials. Oversized clothing that clearly wasn't hers, no shoes, visible injuries, extreme fear, checking if she was being followed. Those signs indicated she was in danger. His decision to call 911 likely saved her life. The training was implemented across rideshare platforms and led to multiple documented cases where drivers identified trafficking victims and got them help. Carlos remained in touch with Elena throughout her recovery, checking in periodically to see how she was doing. He felt a connection to her, not romantic or parental, but the bond that comes from being part of someone's rescue story. You changed my life, Elena told Carlos during one coffee meeting months after the rescue. I was sure I'd die in that warehouse. I thought I'd never see my family again, but you believed me when I asked for help. You didn't ignore what you saw or decide it wasn't your problem. You got involved. That's why I'm free now. You saved yourself by finding the courage to escape, Carlos countered. And you saved 37 other women by reporting what happened. I just drove you to the police station. But lots of people wouldn't have done even that, Elena said. They would have been uncomfortable, but not wanted to get involved. You chose to care about a stranger. That choice saved my life. Viktor Volkov and his associates faced an array of federal and state charges: human trafficking, kidnapping, forced labor, sex trafficking of adults, sex trafficking of minors, 3 of the survivors were under 18. Immigration violations, racketeering, conspiracy, assault, threats. The evidence was overwhelming. Rescued survivors provided testimony. Physical evidence from the warehouse documented the conditions. Financial records showed the flow of money through the operation. Communications between traffickers detailed their activities. Prosecutors offered plea deals to lower-level defendants in exchange for testimony against Viktor Volkov, the kingpin. Several accepted, providing insider details about how the operation worked. This wasn't opportunistic crime, explained prosecutor Jennifer Martinez. This was systematic, organized trafficking run as a business. Volkov recruited women from Central America using false promises. He smuggled them into the U.S. He held them through debt bondage, threats against their families, and physical violence. He exploited them for profit. He destroyed lives methodically and without remorse. The prosecution's case was built around several key survivors willing to testify, including Elena Rodriguez and Jessica Williams. Elena's testimony was particularly powerful. She described being recruited in Honduras, the false promises, the journey to the U.S., the horrific conditions in the warehouse, the constant threats and abuse, and finally her escape. Viktor Volkov told me if I ever tried to leave, he'd kill my mother and sisters in Honduras, Elena testified. He showed me photos of them to prove he knew where they lived. I believed him. That's why I stayed for 3 months, even though every day I wanted to escape. I was more afraid of what he'd do to my family than of what he was doing to me. What made you finally try to escape? A woman named Jessica was brought to the warehouse. She was American, kidnapped from Miami. Volkov was holding her for ransom. His men were nervous about her. They said it was too risky, that her family would bring police. They were distracted. When a guard fell asleep, I saw my chance. I thought even if Volkov hurts my family, maybe I can help save Jessica and the other girls. I had to try. Jessica Williams testified about being kidnapped from a nightclub parking lot, held for 8 days, sexually assaulted, and threatened with death if her family didn't pay ransom. I genuinely believed they'd kill me, Jessica said. They were cold, businesslike. I was property to them, leverage for money. The only reason I'm alive is because Elena escaped and led police to us before Volkov decided what to do with me. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for Viktor Volkov and most counts for his associates. At sentencing, each survivor who wished to speak provided victim impact statements. Elena's was particularly moving. Viktor Volkov stole 3 months of my life. He promised me a job that would help my poor family in Honduras. Instead, he enslaved me, abused me, and exploited me. He threatened to kill my family if I didn't obey. He treated me and 37 other women like property, like things he owned. Because of him, I can't go home to Honduras. His threats against my family are still real if I return. I may never see my mother and sisters again. He's taken my country, my family, my sense of safety. But I survived. I escaped. I helped save 37 other women. Viktor Volkov tried to destroy me, but he failed. I'm building a new life in America. I'm getting an education. I'm helping other trafficking survivors. Every day I'm free is a victory against him. I want Viktor Volkov in prison for the rest of his life. Not just to protect me, but to protect every vulnerable woman he might target in the future. He's a predator who destroys lives for profit. He deserves no mercy. Judge Patricia Morrison sentenced Viktor Volkov to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, plus an additional 150 years for the multiple counts. Mr. Volkov, you are a professional human trafficker who systematically exploited vulnerable women for over a decade, Judge Morrison said. You recruited them through deception. You smuggled them into the country. You held them through debt bondage, threats, and violence. You forced them into prostitution. You treated human beings as property to be bought, sold, and exploited. The harm you've caused is immeasurable. The 38 women rescued from your warehouse will carry the trauma of your abuse for the rest of their lives. Families have been torn apart. Lives have been permanently altered. You showed no remorse during trial. Your testimony revealed you view your victims as commodities, not people. You're dangerous to society and deserve the maximum sentence possible. Volkov's associates received sentences ranging from 15 to 40 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with prosecutors. The 38 women rescued from Volkov's operation each faced unique recovery paths, but all shared common challenges: processing trauma, rebuilding lives from nothing, navigating complex legal systems, and finding safety and stability. Elena Rodriguez's journey. Elena worked with victim services to access comprehensive support. She was granted a T visa, allowing her to remain legally in the U.S. She was placed in transitional housing specifically for trafficking survivors, where she had safety, stability, and access to services. The first few months were the hardest, Elena told her therapist, Dr. Maria Santos. 6 months after her rescue, I had nightmares every night. I was terrified Volkov's people would find me.
I felt guilty about the other women who'd been trapped longer than me. I worried constantly about my family in Honduras, but with therapy, support, and time, Elena began healing. The nightmares decreased, her hypervigilance lessened. She started believing she might actually be safe. Elena enrolled in community college, studying social work with the goal of helping other trafficking survivors. I want to use my experience to help others, Elena explained. I understand what survivors go through because I've been there. I know the fear, the shame, the difficulty of rebuilding. But I also know recovery is possible. The question of her family in Honduras was complex. Elena desperately wanted to see them, but returning to Honduras was dangerous. Volkov's network extended there, and retaliation against her family remained a real threat. We've coordinated with law enforcement in Honduras, explained victim advocate Lisa Martinez. Elena's family has been moved to a safer location and given protection. But Elena returning there would put everyone at risk. It's heartbreaking, but for now she needs to stay in the U.S. Elena maintained contact with her family through carefully monitored phone calls and video chats. Her mother was devastated that Elena couldn't come home but grateful she was alive and safe. Misha, I'm so proud of you, Elena's mother told her during one call. You survived something terrible. You saved other women. You're building a new life. That's more than I ever dared hope for when you disappeared. 2 years after her rescue, Elena was thriving. She'd completed her associate's degree and was working toward her bachelor's in social work. She volunteered with anti-trafficking organizations, speaking publicly about her experience to raise awareness. She'd built a network of friends and support in Miami. I'm not the same person I was before Volkov, Elena reflected. That innocent 19-year-old from Honduras doesn't exist anymore. I'm someone who's survived hell and come out stronger. I'm someone who knows how cruel the world can be but also how much good exists. I'm building a life I never imagined possible. Jessica Williams's journey. Jessica, the American woman kidnapped from the nightclub parking lot, faced different challenges than the international trafficking survivors. She could return to her family immediately, had citizenship and no immigration concerns, and had a support system in Miami. But psychological recovery was still complex. Jessica had been kidnapped, held for 8 days, sexually assaulted multiple times, and threatened with death. The trauma was severe. I can't go to nightclubs anymore, Jessica told her therapist 3 months after rescue. I panic in parking lots. I have nightmares about being grabbed, held down, hurt. I feel like the world isn't safe anymore. Jessica's family struggled to understand. They were grateful she'd survived, but they wanted her to move on and get back to normal. They didn't grasp that there was no normal after what Jessica had experienced. My parents keep asking when I'll go back to work, when I'll start dating again, when I'll be myself again, Jessica said, frustrated. They don't understand that I've been permanently changed. I'm not going to just bounce back like nothing happened. Jessica joined a support group for trafficking and kidnapping survivors. Connecting with others who'd experienced similar trauma helped her feel less alone. They understand in a way my family can't, Jessica explained. They know what it's like to be held captive, to be powerless, to be violated and threatened. I don't have to explain or justify my reactions. They just get it. Over time, with therapy and support, Jessica found a new equilibrium. She returned to work part-time. She started dating again cautiously. She became an advocate for trafficking awareness, sharing her story to help others recognize the signs. Trafficking isn't just something that happens to immigrants or runaways, Jessica told audiences. I was an American citizen, middle class, educated. I was grabbed from a nightclub parking lot in my own city. Anyone can be victimized. We all need to be aware and vigilant. The other survivors. The other 36 women rescued from Volkov's warehouse each had unique stories and recovery paths. Several were granted T visas and remained in the U.S., building new lives like Elena. Some chose to return to their home countries after Volkov's conviction, feeling safer with him imprisoned. The 3 minors, ages 14, 16, and 17, were placed in specialized youth services for trafficking survivors. Women who were pregnant received prenatal care and support, deciding what to do about their pregnancies. Those with drug dependencies, some had been forcibly addicted by traffickers, received addiction treatment. All received trauma therapy, medical care, legal advocacy, and connection to support services. Every survivor's journey is different, explained Dr. Patricia Chen, who worked with multiple survivors from the case. Some recover relatively quickly, others struggle for years. Some want to share their stories publicly, others need privacy. Some stay in the U.S., others go home. There's no single right way to survive trafficking and rebuild a life. What united all the survivors was the recognition that Carlos Mendez's decision to believe Elena and call 911 had changed the trajectory of all their lives. If Elena hadn't escaped, and if her Uber driver hadn't helped her, I'd probably still be in that warehouse, said Rosa, one of the survivors who'd been held for over a year. Carlos didn't know me, he didn't know any of us, but his decision to help one scared woman saved all of us. Elena and Jessica's case, and the rescue of 38 trafficking survivors, highlighted systemic issues in how society addresses human trafficking. Vulnerability factors. Most of the survivors rescued from Volkov's operation had been vulnerable before trafficking due to poverty, making them susceptible to promises of good jobs, limited education, making them less able to identify scams, Family instability or violence, making them more willing to leave home. Immigration status, making them afraid to seek help. Prior abuse or trauma, making them easier to control. Traffickers are skilled at identifying vulnerable people, explained anti-trafficking expert Dr. Jennifer Park. They look for poverty, isolation, instability, factors that make someone desperate enough to believe false promises and afraid to seek help once trapped. The recruitment pipeline. Volkov's operation demonstrated how trafficking networks recruit false promises of legitimate jobs, lure women into the pipeline. Transportation is arranged, creating debt bondage. Once in the destination country, victims' documents are confiscated. Threats against victims' families ensure compliance. Debt continues growing, creating permanent servitude. It's systematic and professional, said FBI agent David Chen. These aren't random crimes of opportunity. They're organized operations with recruitment strategies, transportation logistics, and exploitation methods refined over years. Why victims don't escape? People often ask, why didn't they just leave? But the barriers to escaping trafficking are immense. Physical restraint, locked rooms, guards, surveillance, threats of violence against victims or their families, debt bondage making them feel they owe money, lack of documentation or legal status, language barriers, fear of law enforcement. Traffickers tell victims police will arrest them. Trauma bonding with traffickers. No money, resources, or support system. Nowhere safe to go. Elena escaped only because a guard fell asleep and a window was improperly barred, explained victim advocate Maria Rodriguez. That's how few opportunities victims have. Most never get that chance. Community awareness. Carlos Mendez's intervention demonstrated the importance of community awareness. He'd noticed concerning signs and acted on them. But many trafficking situations go unnoticed because community members either don't recognize the signs or don't want to get involved. We need everyone to be aware of trafficking indicators and willing to report concerns, said Detective Lisa Park. Hotel workers, rideshare drivers, restaurant staff, neighbors, healthcare providers, people in all sectors might encounter trafficking victims. If we're all vigilant and willing to act like Carlos did, we can identify and help more victims. Anti-trafficking organizations launched awareness campaigns, teaching people to recognize signs. Someone who appears to be controlled by another person, people with no identification or control over their own documents, workers who seem afraid, submissive, or unable to speak for themselves, evidence of physical abuse or signs of restraint, people who are not free to come and go as they please, workers who seem to live and work in the same place, multiple people living in cramped conditions, someone who seems unusually anxious, fearful, or paranoid.
The demand side. Trafficking persists because there's demand for exploited labor and commercial sex. Volkov's operation existed because men paid to have sex with trafficked women. Other trafficking operations exist because businesses want cheap labor and consumers want cheap products. We focus on prosecuting traffickers, which is important, said prosecutor Jennifer Martinez. But we also need to address demand. Men who paid to have sex with Volkov's victims were committing crimes too. They were buying trafficked women. Until we make that socially unacceptable and aggressively prosecute buyers, trafficking will continue. Immigration policy. Many trafficking survivors face deportation because they were in the U.S. without legal status. T visas helped, but the application process was complex, and not all survivors qualified or wanted to stay. Our immigration system often treats trafficking survivors as criminals rather than victims, explained immigration attorney Robert Chen. They're undocumented because traffickers smuggled them here. Deporting them punishes victims for crimes committed against them. We need immigration policies that protect survivors rather than re-victimizing them. Resource gaps. Despite the massive scope of human trafficking, resources for survivors were limited. Shelters were full. Therapy waiting lists were long. Legal services were overwhelmed. Many survivors couldn't access the help they needed. We rescue victims and then struggle to provide adequate services, admitted Social Services Coordinator Jennifer Martinez. We need more funding for survivor services, housing, therapy, legal help, job training. We can't just rescue people and abandon them to figure out recovery alone. 5 years after Carlos Mendez picked up Elena Rodriguez at that gas station at 2:47 a.m., the ripples from that intervention continued spreading. Elena, now 24, had completed her bachelor's degree in social work and was working for an anti-trafficking organization in Miami. She provided case management for trafficking survivors, helping them navigate the complex systems of legal, medical, and social services. I work with women who are where I was 5 years ago, newly rescued, traumatized, confused, scared, Elena told an interviewer. I understand what they're experiencing because I lived it. I can tell them honestly, recovery is possible. I know because I've done it. You can too. Elena had become a prominent voice in anti-trafficking advocacy, speaking at conferences, consulting on policy, and sharing her story to raise awareness. She'd been featured in a documentary about trafficking survivors and had testified before Congress about needed policy changes. Viktor Volkov tried to make me invisible, just another exploited woman with no voice, no power, no future, Elena reflected. But I refused to stay invisible. I escaped, I testified. And now I use my voice to help other survivors and to push for change. That's my revenge against Volkov, living fully and using my experience to fight trafficking. The question of her family in Honduras remained complicated. Elena still couldn't safely return, though Volkov was imprisoned for life. His trafficking network had connections that could still threaten her family if she appeared there. But 2 years ago, Elena's mother and 2 youngest sisters had been able to come to the U.S. through a special program for family members of trafficking survivors. They now lived in Miami near Elena. "Having my family here is everything," Elena said, tears in her eyes. "For 3 years after my rescue, I could only see them through video calls. Now I can hug my mom. I can watch my sisters grow up. We're rebuilding our family in a new place." Carlos Mendez, now 46, was still driving for Uber but had become a trainer and advocate for trafficking awareness among rideshare drivers. He'd partnered with anti-trafficking organizations to develop training programs teaching drivers to recognize victims. "Every driver should know the signs of trafficking," Carlos told training participants. "We're on the roads at all hours, picking up passengers in all kinds of situations. We might be the only person a trafficking victim encounters who could help them. We need to be aware and willing to act." The training program Carlos helped develop was implemented across multiple rideshare platforms and had led to dozens of documented cases where drivers identified trafficking victims and connected them with help. Carlos's intervention 5 years ago didn't just save Elena and the 37 other women in that warehouse, said anti-trafficking expert Dr. Patricia Chen. It catalyzed awareness across the entire rideshare industry. Millions of drivers have now been trained to recognize trafficking. That awareness has led to hundreds of interventions and lives saved. Jessica Williams, now 31, had largely rebuilt her life in the 5 years since her rescue. She'd married her longtime boyfriend, had a 2-year-old daughter, and was working as a victim advocate helping other kidnapping and trafficking survivors. "What happened to me was horrific," Jessica reflected. 8 days of captivity, assault, and threats changed me permanently, but it also showed me how much I could survive, and it gave me a mission, helping others who've experienced similar trauma. Jessica spoke publicly about her experience, emphasizing that trafficking doesn't just happen to immigrants or runaways, it can happen to anyone. "I was a middle-class American woman grabbed from a parking lot in my own city," Jessica told audiences. "Trafficking looks different than most people think. It's not always international. It's not always sex trafficking. It's not always obvious. We need to broaden our understanding of what trafficking looks like so we can recognize it in all its forms." The other 36 survivors from Volkov's warehouse had varying outcomes over 5 years. Most had built stable lives, some in the U.S., some back in their home countries. A few continued struggling with trauma, addiction, or instability. All carried the experience with them, but most had found ways to integrate it into their lives rather than being defined by it. "Trafficking survivors are incredibly resilient," said therapist Dr. Maria Santos, who'd worked with many of the women over 5 years. "They've survived unimaginable trauma. Many go on to build good lives, careers, relationships, families. The trafficking doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of their story rather than the entirety of it." 10 years after Carlos Mendez noticed Elena Rodriguez's terror-filled eyes in his rearview mirror, they marked the anniversary with an event at the anti-trafficking organization, where Elena now worked as director of survivor services. Elena, now 29, reflected on the decade since her rescue. 10 years ago, I was a terrified 19-year-old who'd been trafficked from Honduras, held in a warehouse for 3 months, and had just escaped. I was barefoot, wearing someone else's clothes, convinced I'd either die or be recaptured. When Carlos picked me up and believed me, and called 911, he gave me a chance to survive. Everything I've built in the last 10 years, my education, my career, my life in the U.S., reuniting with my family, exists because Carlos chose to help a stranger. Elena described the decade of healing, growth, and advocacy. She'd completed her master's in social work, had been promoted to director at her organization, had helped hundreds of trafficking survivors access services and rebuild their lives, and had become a nationally recognized expert on trafficking recovery. Viktor Volkov tried to erase me, make me just another nameless, exploited woman with no future, Elena said. But I refused to be erased. I survived. I spoke out. I built a career helping others survive. Every trafficking survivor I help is a victory against Volkov and everyone like him. Carlos, now 51 and recently retired from driving to focus full-time on anti-trafficking advocacy, spoke about how that night 10 years ago had changed his understanding of his role in society. "I thought I was just an Uber driver picking up passengers and getting them safely to destinations," Carlos said. "Then Elena got in my car and I realized sometimes we're in a position to do more than transport people. We're in a position to save them.
Elena taught me to pay attention, trust my instincts, and be willing to get involved when someone needs help. Carlos's advocacy work had expanded nationally. He'd consulted with rideshare companies, transportation industries, and hospitality businesses about training employees to recognize trafficking. His training programs had reached over 500,000 workers and had led to hundreds of documented interventions. That one decision 10 years ago to believe Elena and call 911 has had ripples I never imagined, Carlos reflected. Elena was saved. 37 other women were rescued. Volkov's operation was dismantled. I became an advocate. Training programs were developed. Hundreds of other victims have been identified and helped. One moment of paying attention and acting on instinct created all that. At the event, several of the other survivors from Volkov's warehouse, who were still in the Miami area, shared their own journeys over the decade. Rosa, who'd been held for over a year before the rescue, spoke about building a life in the U.S. 10 years ago, I'd been trafficked for a year and saw no escape. When FBI raided that warehouse and said we were free, I couldn't believe it. The last decade has been about learning to believe I really am free, to make my own choices, build my own life, pursue my own dreams. Maria, who'd been pregnant when rescued and had chosen to keep her baby, introduced her now 9-year-old daughter. This is Sophia. She was born 4 months after I was rescued. She's never known the horror I experienced, and that's everything to me. She gets to grow up free, safe, with opportunities. That's the future Carlos and Elena gave, not just me but my daughter. The event concluded with the unveiling of a mural at the organization's building. The artwork depicted a woman breaking free from chains, with imagery representing the journey from captivity to freedom to advocacy. In the corner was a small image of an Uber car, acknowledging Carlos's role. After the ceremony, Carlos and Elena stood together looking at the mural, reflecting on a decade since their lives had intersected in one desperate moment. 10 years, Elena said quietly. I was 19 when you picked me up at that gas station. I'm 29 now. I've lived more than half my life since you saved me. That's incredible when I think about it. Volkov nearly ended my life at 19, but because of you, I've had a whole adult life. Education, career, family here with me, meaningful work. All of it exists because of you. It exists because of your courage, Carlos countered. You escaped an impossible situation. You reported what happened despite being terrified. You've used your trauma to help hundreds of others. The impact is yours, Elena. I just made a phone call. But that's exactly it, Elena said. You made the call. You didn't ignore what you saw. You didn't decide it wasn't your problem. You chose to care about a stranger. That choice saved my life and 37 others. That choice led to Volkov's arrest. That choice inspired the advocacy work you've done that's helped hundreds more victims. One phone call, one moment of choosing to care. That's how powerful individual action can be.
They stood together in comfortable silence. Two people whose lives had intersected in crisis a decade ago, and whose partnership had created ripples that spread far beyond their individual stories. One woman fleeing for her life, one driver who noticed and cared, one phone call that changed everything, one life saved that night. 37 more rescued days later. Hundreds helped in the decades since, through awareness and advocacy. Industries transformed, communities empowered, a trafficking kingpin imprisoned for life. One terrified woman wearing someone else's clothes, one driver who saw beyond the surface, one moment that became an enduring legacy. That was always enough, more than enough, everything. This story is dedicated to every rideshare driver, taxi driver, truck driver, and transportation worker who pays attention to passengers who might be in danger, recognizes concerning signs, and has the courage to report suspected trafficking. Your vigilance saves lives. And to every trafficking survivor, you deserve freedom, safety, and support. What happened to you wasn't your fault.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.